guys, Nikki here. I'm here today to talk about 2001: A Space Odyssey, the movie. So, given how I felt about the book, I was pretty nervous for the movie, but I did have hope because this is highly touted as one of the best early sci-fi movies ever made, and Stanley Kubrick produced and directed it, I believe. And he's very well known for this movie and for just being very good at his job. And so, while I was nervous because I didn't love the book, I was excited to watch one of the highest grossing science fiction movies of its time. So, as I said to my husband, and he said I should mention this here, I was moving forward with hope in my heart. So, I'm gonna jump to my likes and dislikes here. Some of it I came about through discussion with my husband. He watched this with me because he was also curious about it and didn't want to read the book. So I just filled him in if there was stuff missing. And so my first like is the cinematography. I love how this movie was shot. It was fun. The cuts were impactful. The camera angles just did a really good job helping convey the situation. And they did so much with comparatively little in terms of special effects. It was just amazing. I loved it. And once you were on the spaceship with Frank and Dave, let me tell you, there are an outrageous number of butt shots, and I am goddamn here for it. My second positive was the sound, and this is actually something that my husband brought up partway through the movie, and then upon kind of realizing it after he said it, I had to agree immensely. The sound here was amazing. It added so much to the movie. They were able to convey the tone so much more effectively with the background music. It was on point at every time there was a tone shift or they were trying to convey a specific emotion. It did really good at bringing Hal to life. I couldn't believe how well executed this movie was. And my third positive is actually just that the story fit the silver screen so well. There was a lot in the book that, even having taken it away from the movie didn't suffer for it. And while, like I said, there were some things they took out and there were some other issues, I 100% preferred watching the movie to reading the book. 100%. There's one thing I'm going to mention here that I think exemplifies how much better the story fit the silver screen to the book, and that was the scene where Hal died. Or rather, where Hal was murdered. When Dave comes back and decides to get rid of Hal, to decommission Hal, he goes into the memory bank and starts pulling out all of the memories and all of the logic processes to take away his sentience. And in the book, it's horrible, but you feel so justified in it. You really root for Dave's actions. But in the movie, this scene is absolutely chilling. And just the way they have Hal talking to Dave, the way they use the music to convey Hal's emotion because Hal speaks in a monotone voice. And just the way Dave interacts with the memory and logic processes as Hal is beginning to decline is just, like, it was my favorite scene in the movie, hands down. But reading the book and versus watching the movie, I remember not feeling the same sense of impact from that scene in the book as compared to when I watched the movie. And so now I'm going to jump into some negatives. There really weren't any in terms of the movie. It was, the negatives here are still more in terms of the story and the storytelling, which carries over from the book. So one negative is that even though this translated over better as a movie than as a book. The pacing I still had issues with. It was still very jumpy, and there wasn't a lot of explanation between these time jumps. So it made it very hard to follow. Because they cut stuff out, there were certain parts of the movie where I felt like I was missing a lot. And some of it is because they cut that stuff out, and some of it is because the story just would not tell you stuff. And it was very frustrating. But these are pretty minor because I know they're tied more to my issues with the story from the book than it is the movie itself. And my third negative here, this is the only one that's like a true negative for the movie specifically. And that's that somehow they made the ending like 100 times more like dramatic and unnecessary. But strangely enough, they made 1,000 times more confusing. Because you don't get to be in Dave's head like you do in the book. The ending, they kept the ending the same, but there's just like no explanation as to what's going on. And it's so much more confusing, and I was so sad. That being said, I went into the movie knowing the ending was really confusing with the weird space baby. But that was like the least confusing part, I think. Like, I don't know how to feel about that ending. It was crazy. And so vague and weird and unexplained. And with that, I'm going to move into the characters. I think they were very well represented here. They were still bland and generic, but the actors, I felt, really brought them to life. They did, by having them presented by people with faces I could see, instead of trying to make up a face for them. I found they had a lot more personality in the movie. I loved the way Hal was presented. He was very chill in the movie, in both his voice and death, and just the way he was presented and the way they represented his emotions. I loved how ominous he always felt. I think that they cast the actors really well to fit the roles. My specific example here are Dave and Frank. And that's because I think they both look like generic movie star astronauts. They are fit, they are reasonably handsome, and they play astronauts. And that's kind of how I feel the characters in the book felt. They felt like astronauts that you would see in a movie. Here, I'm just going to give, within this casting, I'm going to give points to Douglas Rain. He's the guy who voiced Hal, who I think just did an amazing job. Like, amazing. One of the best characters in the movie. No, yeah, one of the best. And with that, I'm just going to do a wrap-up. I really don't want to talk about the characters too much because it makes me sad that there's not a lot of character work. So in terms of book-to-movie adaptation, I'm going to give this a 3.5 out of 5. Some liberties were taken, and there were a lot of changes to the story. And these changes didn't necessarily fix issues with the story that I had from when I read the book. And they made the ending way more confusing. The pacing was still jumpy. The characters, the story, and the action, while they fit together better, they still weren't like a perfect fit, and they didn't fall together in a way that was particularly great, even on screen. All of these negative things being said, it was still a pretty good adaptation. It is not the worst adaptation I've ever had to watch. I did not have to get wine drunk to finish it, so that says a lot. Ready Player One, I'm looking at you. That's all I'm going to say here. In terms of a movie unto itself, I'm actually going to give this a 4.5 out of 5. This was an amazing movie. It was shot well. The sound engineering was phenomenal. The special effects were crazy for the time. Excluding the ending, which is where the 0.5 is taken off, it's a good movie. A unique and interesting story with a unique and interesting setting. The way they conveyed tone, the way they conveyed the story, the way they conveyed the characters. I 100% understand now why Stanley Kubrick is such a well-tuted producer-director, and I understand why this is one of his best movies, and I understand how the two things come together and make one of the highest-grossing science fiction movies of its time. I get it, and I think it's hilarious that I got a copy from my dad, and he's like, just keep in mind what time this was made in. You could tell some of the practical effects were a little old, but, this is a really timeless movie. If you're interested in the story, don't read the book. Watch the movie. It's way more entertaining in my opinion, and I'm somebody who does not say that often. And you know what? I'm actually going to leave it there on a weird but good note. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.